Renna's Crossing by Geordie Morse. This is an audio version of the book as read by the author. Chapter 21. Memory is my witness, love is my judge. For the last time, it's ugly and I don't want her wearing it in front of my family. They're going to ask questions that I don't want to answer. Two hands, belonging to a dark-haired woman with a thin, freckled face, reached down and removed something that was hanging heavily around Renna's neck. It was a bright silver pendant in the shape of a bird. The woman's husband was standing behind her, rubbing his receding hairline where beautiful sandy locks had once flourished in earlier days. My mom said it was important that she doesn't take it off, though. I know you and her don't see eye to eye, but she's always had a good reason for stuff like this. The woman turned away from Renna and stood up, ascending to the high realm of the adults. I know you believe that, David, and you know that I try my best to be accepting of everything that she does. I really do. Renna seems to like wearing it, so I've been letting it slide, but this is the first time in a long time that my whole family has been able to get together like this, and they're just not... They can't begin to understand that world your mom lives in. And I'm not ready to try and defend it for her in front of them. You understand, don't you? David sighed and adjusted his glasses. I do. I know this is important for you, Sasha. All right, we'll leave it off for tonight. Besides, I'm more worried about interacting with your brothers after how things went last Christmas. You'll be fine. I know you don't do well with hooligans like them, but just flatter them and they'll grow fond of you soon enough. And don't worry about Carla. She's a tightly wound workaholic, just had her second divorce in 3 years. I can't get her to like me, and there's probably no hope for you either. Wonderful. Okay, let's do this thing. I'll smile and shake hands, and you say their names before people realize I don't remember them all, right? David dropped into a crouch in front of Renna, and she immediately put her hands out to feel the scruff on his face, as she always liked to do when it was within reach. He smiled and adjusted her dress, which Renna had failed to keep smooth and straightened during the lengthy car trip. Okay, when you go inside, why don't you go find Stevie and Mila? You remember them, right? You all played together last year. Not Stevie, he's the older one. You're thinking of Lyle. Sasha corrected him as she ran her fingers through her hair to keep down the flyaways. Right, whichever ones, the kids around your age. They're 6 and 7 this year. Renna's always been the youngest this generation. David turned to his daughter and gave her an empathetic shrug. Well, good luck to both of us, I suppose. Renna wasn't quite sure what the whole conversation was supposed to mean. It often felt as though her parents talked about a whole lot of different things in a short time without actually thinking much about any one of them. She could tell they were both more nervous about the party than she was. The next couple hours were a whirlwind of greetings, questions, and general noise as Renna was brought around to many people who her parents claimed she had met before, but she certainly didn't recognize. The kids around her age were interesting at first, but they seemed less interested in her when they realized she couldn't hold an adequate conversation about any of the programs they had been watching on TV. For a little while, they amused themselves with her ignorance by asking her if she knew so-and-so actor or such-and-such cartoon, and they would laugh each time she told them she didn't, because her family didn't have TV with lots of channels. It was a game that annoyed her, but at the same time she enjoyed the opportunity to be included. Eventually, the other kids had had their fun and went off somewhere without telling Renna where they were going. When she crossed paths with one around the house, they would blatantly avoid her in that uniquely childish way and escape when Renna couldn't squeeze through the maze of adult legs as fast as they could. Perhaps this was another game of theirs, but this time she couldn't even be around to enjoy the joke at her expense. Finally, Renna had reached the limit of saturation with noisy, crowded gatherings and began to seek a quiet corner that she could hide herself in. Generally, a shoe closet, mudroom, or second-floor landing served well for this purpose, somewhere where she could still be within proximity of everyone, but also sit comfortably on the periphery of the party and just be, without having to interact or be interacted with. It was a sensation she greatly enjoyed and would often spend the greater part of the evening sitting somewhere by herself, listening to muffled voices and laughter, the tromping of people's feet, as she thought to herself, sang quietly to herself, or simply just sat there without doing much of anything at all. Unfortunately, this party seemed to be less localized than most, so people had the annoying habit of wandering about the house. Renna had to relocate herself a couple times until she finally found the door to the basement. Looking around to make sure no one was going to catch her, she slipped down into the darkness, creeping down the plywood stairs backwards on all fours to prevent an accident. The basement was cluttered. It seemed as if the family who owned this house had stuff down there to furnish an entire second home. Renna squeezed her way through the narrow corridors made between bed frames, old couches and recliners, standing lamps, stacks of cardboard boxes, and piles of old clothes. As she turned a corner formed by a set of snow tires, she caught sight of a shelf packed with old board games. Renna eagerly rushed over and inspected them. Surely they would be a fun way to pass the time. However, she quickly realized that most of them had way too many little pieces and far too many instructions written in tiny print to be any good to play. She was about to abandon her search when one particular box caught her attention. She didn't really know why, since it did nothing to stand out against all the other brightly colored game boxes. There is no label on it, and the container was very old and battered. Renna opened it up, and out fell a board and some kind of strange plastic disc with a round glass in the center. The biggest letters at the top were O, U, I, J, and A. The words yes and no were printed below, along with the entire alphabet and the numbers 0 through 9, in some weird font that reminded Renna of very old black and white movies that her dad liked to watch. The box had no other instructions or pieces, yet there was something irresistibly intriguing about it. Renna felt compelled to pick up the disc and look through it. After a moment, she comprehended that she was supposed to put the disc on the board and look at all the letters through it. She wasn't quite sure how she had figured that out, but she was quite proud that she had done so all on her own. She would have to tell her dad about it afterwards. He, more than her mother, was the one likely to praise the things she tried out, rather than getting upset about ruined carpets or just planted flower beds. As she put the disc on the board, she was amazed when it started moving all on its own. And what's more, it seemed to be spelling out words by moving over each letter with the glass. Renna wasn't really able to read yet, but amazingly enough, the words were coming into her head without her having to try. There was something trying to talk to her. It asked her for her name, and so she told it. It seemed pleased. It asked her where she was, and she told it. She wondered where it was, so she asked. Its response didn't make sense to her, but it told her that it wanted to be where she was. Renna asked it if it couldn't come there right now. It told her it could. All she had to do was concentrate very hard and wish for it, and it would happen. Could she do that? Of course she could. Renna liked being helpful. But before she did so, she figured she should know its name. After all, she had introduced herself, but it hadn't returned the favor. But of course, it said. That was the most important part. In order for it to come here, she needed to say its name. It was a very strange name, with sounds Renna had never heard other people say before. But regardless, she felt like at this moment she could say it. She said its name, and then all was fire. 12 years later, Renna wiped the cold sweat from her forehead and steadied herself against the stone altar, trying to keep her knees from giving way. She felt violently ill. The room around her was unsteady and hard to keep in focus, as if she was walking about with a high fever. She couldn't think straight. All of the words in her mind slipped about, and she wasn't able to put them into an order that made any sense to her. She sat down heavily on the altar and focused simply on breathing. A clarion voice came through the chaos. Job's voice, their slight lilt of exasperation when they were explaining to Renna, for the umpteenth time, about why centering one's mind was the first imperative step to performing any magic. Just as Renna was getting her wits about herself, Another voice came, cold and steely. It took you long enough. Renna looked over to see Regana, standing at the doorway, looking down upon her. She did not smile, but her eyes flashed with a triumphant light. I had hoped that pendant would have been enough to trigger the memories. It was quite a pain retrieving it. It seems you had buried them deeper than I expected. Thank that silly foster home for that. You knew? Renna croaked. Of course. Why didn't you tell me? I didn't want to waste this unique opportunity. Not everyone has access to experiences that can generate such intense emotional energy. This is what separates blood from blood. There are witches whose pedigree is based on their opulent, privileged lifestyles. And then there's us, whose power comes from the feelings of what we've lost and the injustices we've suffered. We are the ones who can use that power to change things. Renna felt sick all over again. She returned to the altar for support. I remember now. After the fire, I came here, but you were trying to use me for something. I remember being down here, and you were always casting some sort of magic. I was trying to determine if you had any control over the demon once you had summoned it into this world. I knew Mab hadn't ended it permanently. If you did, it would have been an incredible boon for us. But you were far too broken from that little incident to be of any use at that time. Little incident? Renna trembled. Everyone died that night, except for me, because... The truth caught itself in her throat, refusing to be said. Yes. There was not a trace of empathy on Regana's weathered face. And now that you know that, you can use that suffering in a productive manner. From here on, your magical abilities will grow faster than when you... Your magical abilities will grow even faster when you bring those emotions into play. There was something about Regana that had always frightened Renna from the moment she met her for the first time, most recently. It was easier to ignore then. The old witch was imposing in every aspect. But at this moment, Renna saw the face of that fear, one that could talk about someone's deepest wounds and trauma, and not feel the slightest bit of compassion for them. She was on a completely different wavelength, one that Renna couldn't understand how someone claiming to be a human would get onto. It wasn't just me. Renna realized this now. You've been messing with everyone here. The way that you treat the twins and Lucy. It's all intentional, isn't it? You're manipulating all of us to get what you want in the end. Regana's face hardened even more, if that was possible. What I am doing is teaching. Renna's anger came to a burning point. Like hell, I know a good teacher, one who didn't deserve such a crappy student. Your sentimentality is deluding you. I've been where you are now, Perenelle. I know everything you're feeling. You're so close to everything you wanted. Or did you come here in your desire for a better path only to quit when you're faced with adversity? I'm done listening to you. Renna snatched up her backpack. This isn't what I wanted. I didn't know what I wanted, and I still don't, but being lost is better than being here. Regana did not try to stop her when Renna approached the door to leave. She stood stone still, staring past her grandniece, her gaze on something only she could see. Her last words followed Renna on the way out. This means you failed me twice now. Before the meaning of this could attack her, Renna launched herself up the stairs. She rushed forward, barely seeing where she was going, but somehow, as if she was in a half-lucid dream, she took all the correct turns and doors, navigating only with her overwhelming desire to leave this horrible manor. She was up out of the basement, out the front door, and rushing across the cobblestones of the pathway that had led her to Carnarthex many days before. The sight of the stones that marked the ward slowed her but a single pace before she ran through it. There was nothing protecting her from the demon anymore. But she didn't care. Now that she knew, it would be nothing more than lukewarm justice to be finished off by the creature whose wrath she had been somehow spared from, while the rest of her family had perished. Or maybe she would stand a chance now. She was fine using Morgana's methods if it meant finishing off the demon then and there, so it couldn't hurt anyone else, as long as she went with it and brought the whole awful story to a close. Renna realized that she couldn't run anymore about half a mile after her body had told her so. She collapsed to her knees and tried to keep her lungs from crawling out of her throat to get air as she pulled herself over to a rock to sit on. The world was spinning again, and she clutched her head in her hands, trying to block it all out. Tears made trails down her forearms into the sleeves of the thin sweater she wore. She hadn't realized until now that she had left without getting her Letterman jacket from her room. That sadness added itself into the vortex that buffeted Renna's brain about. She didn't even hear something approaching her until gravel cracked from a few feet away. She looked up, but her teary vision in the darkness of the night kept their identity hidden. Panic took the wheel. It must be the demon, come to kill her right now. She had to at least try and fight. What spell would work? Renna? The demon knew her name, but it could never have spoken in that kind of voice. Renna wiped her eyes. Job? It was indeed. They stood there, about as confused as she was, with shoes and pants muddy from the road. Their hair, which they usually took into great consideration, was unkempt, the strongest indicator that Job was not in their normal element. Also, the relief and happiness in their expression felt like a novel thing. She thought it was a good look for them. What are you doing out here? I was headed to Car Narthex to get you, but the truck ran out of gas, so I ended up having to... The rest of Job's excuse was muted by an intense hug. Renna had thought she couldn't cry anymore tonight, but she proved herself very wrong. It took Job a few moments of comprehending how intimately close they suddenly were with another human being before they let themselves hug back. The anger, frustration, confusion, and all the other emotions that they had been feeling towards this girl in her absence seemed to get squeezed right out of them. They thought they had figured out the exact wording and order of the first 17 things they had wanted to say to Renna before this moment, though to be fair, the last 4 were relatively interchangeable. But they hadn't realized before how hugs seemed to communicate so much more than words could sometimes. Somehow, intense feelings of regret, sadness, fear, guilt, and love all permeated from one soul into the next. And in all the world, that was enough for this single moment.